People say men like Garrett Brennan are obsolete. No college degree, no corner office, just two hands and the kind of knowledge that comes from 15 years fixing what breaks when nobody's looking. But on this particular Christmas Eve in a restaurant where a single bottle of wine cost more than his weekly paycheck, those hands would prove more valuable than any MBA on the wall. 4 hours before everything fell apart, Garrett sat at his kitchen table in Sunset Park teaching his son how to resurrect a 20-year-old walkie-talkie. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, but it was clean, warm, and theirs. Wyatt hunched over the circuit board, soldering iron trembling slightly in his 10-year-old grip. The boy's hands moved through sign language as he spoke, a habit so ingrained neither of them thought about it anymore. "Dad, why don't we just buy a new one? This thing's older than me." Garrett's own hands answered in kind voice, following a half-second behind. "Because I can fix it, son. A man doesn't need to buy everything new when he knows how to make the old work again." "But all my friends have the latest stuff. iPhones, AirPods, that new Xbox." Garrett set down his wire stripper and met his son's eyes, the same hazel as his mother's, though they hadn't seen her in 4 years. "And in 2 years, they'll throw all that away for the next version. This walkie-talkie, if we do this right, it'll outlast them all." Wyatt considered this, his face settling into that serious expression that made him seem far older than his years. "So you're saying value isn't about what's newest. Value's about what lasts, about what you can depend on when everything else fails." The words hung between them like a promise. Garrett had learned this lesson the hard way in a hospital room 5 years ago when his son's world had gone silent. The memory still lived in his chest, sharp-edged and permanent. Wyatt at 5 years old, falling from the playground equipment, the sickening crack of skull against metal, and then 6 months of watching his boy navigate a world he could no longer hear. The flashback came, unbidden, fluorescent hospital lights, a doctor with kind eyes and terrible news, Wyatt's small mouth forming words his ears couldn't process. Garrett had sat beside that bed every night, his own helplessness a weight crushing his ribs, and made a choice. If his son couldn't hear him, he would learn a new language. Every night after double shifts, every weekend between jobs, he'd practice sign language until his fingers cramped and his brain felt like mush. YouTube videos at 2 in the morning, library books with water-damaged pages, awkward conversations with deaf community members who had the patience to teach a desperate father. Wyatt's hearing had mostly returned after 8 months, 90% function, the audiologist said, though the boy still relied on his hearing aids in noisy environments. But the language remained. It had become theirs, something they'd built together in the darkness, a bridge constructed syllable by syllable, sign by sign. Garrett's phone buzzed against the Formica table. "Heritage Restaurant," the screen announced. He swiped to answer. "Brennan here." Brian Morrison's voice carried the particular edge of a manager who'd just realized how badly he needed someone. "Garrett, I need you tonight. Big dinner, the biggest we've hosted all year. CEO investors, people who could shut us down with a single bad review. The sound system and electrical have to be flawless." Garrett glanced at the stack of medical bills held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like the Statue of Liberty. $8,247. The number had burned itself into his memory, a tally of everything his insurance hadn't covered from Wyatt's accident. "What time?" 5 to 1. Christmas Eve, premium $380. The math was simple and brutal. Wyatt's bills wouldn't pay themselves. "I'll be there." He ended the call and found his son watching him with that too perceptive gaze. "You have to work tonight." "Yeah, buddy, I'm sorry." Wyatt's hands moved through the signs they'd practiced 1,000 times. "It's okay, Dad. You work so we can have a good life. I understand." The statement landed like a punch. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to understand that his father chose overtime on Christmas Eve because medical debt was a chain neither of them could break. Garrett pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of kid shampoo and innocence that wouldn't last forever. "You know what makes a man, Wyatt. It's not what he has, It's what he's willing to do for the people he loves. The words came from somewhere deep, the kind of truth that defined everything Garrett believed about himself and the world. Later, after dropping Wyatt at his friend Logan's house, a comfortable brownstone where both parents would be home, where the Christmas tree probably hadn't come from a sidewalk lot, where nobody worried about medical bills, Garrett stood in his bedroom and pulled on his work uniform. Navy blue coveralls with Heritage Restaurant embroidered above the breast pocket. The fabric was worn but clean, the name tag polished. He checked his toolkit with the methodical precision of a surgeon, multimeter wire strippers, electrical tapes, spare fuses, voltage tester, headlamp, work gloves. 15 years in this trade had taught him to prepare for everything. The tools were an extension of his hands, each one familiar as his own heartbeat. In a world that increasingly valued algorithms over actual skill, Garrett took pride in work that couldn't be automated or outsourced. When the lights went out, they called men like him. When the systems failed, his knowledge became indispensable. The subway ride from Sunset Park to the Upper East Side was a study in contrasts. Garrett watched the neighborhoods transform through the window from working-class Brooklyn to the glittering wealth of Manhattan. The passengers changed too. Worn work clothes gave way to designer coats. Tired faces became polished masks. By the time he emerged at Lexington Avenue, he'd traveled less than 8 miles, but crossed into a different universe entirely. Heritage Restaurant occupied a corner building that had once been a mansion. Art Deco flourishes gilded the entrance, and through the windows Garrett could see staff moving with choreographed precision. He went around back to the service entrance, badge ready. The security guard waved him through without really seeing him, just another technician, interchangeable and invisible. Inside, the restaurant was being transformed into something from a magazine spread. A 20-foot Christmas tree dominated the lobby, each ornament probably worth more than Garrett's monthly rent. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured rainbows across white tablecloths. The air smelled of money and pine needles and roasting meat that cost more per pound than he made per hour. Brian found him near the kitchen, already stressed despite the early hour. The manager was 45, going on 60, ground down by the constant pressure of serving people who expected perfection and tipped like they were doing you a favor. Garrett, thank God, you're the only tech I trust with this. Brian's handshake was damp with nervous sweat. Tonight's dinner could make or break us. The CEO of some tech company, investors from all over. One electrical failure, one sound glitch, and we're done. Show me what you've got. They walked the space together, Brian explaining the setup while Garrett's mind cataloged potential problems. The main dining area held 15 tables, but the VIP section, roped off with velvet and delusion, seated 8 around a table positioned for maximum visibility. The sound system was high-end but temperamental, the kind of equipment that required regular maintenance and got monthly neglect. Lighting controls were centralized, a single point of failure waiting to happen. Garrett pulled out his checklist, began running diagnostics. Each speaker got tested individually. Every light switch confirmed operational. The electrical panel received his full attention, circuit by circuit, connection by connection. This was where his expertise separated him from the weekend warriors who thought watching YouTube made them electricians. He could read a panel the way some people read faces, interpreting voltage drops and load distribution like a language only he spoke. At 6:15, he opened the main panel for routine verification. His headlamp illuminated the orderly rows of breakers, the neat bundles of wire. The something wasn't right. 3 terminal screws showed fresh tool marks, not stripped, just disturbed. Garrett ran his finger along the connections, felt the micro-movement that shouldn't exist. These had been tight a week ago when he'd last checked. Metal doesn't loosen itself. He pulled out his phone, photographed the panel from multiple angles, then systematically tightened every loose connection. Probably just vibration from the HVAC system, or maybe whoever did the last kitchen renovation had gotten careless. Still, the wrongness of it nagged at him. 15 years of experience created instincts that were rarely wrong. By 6:45, guests began arriving. Garrett watched from his position near the lighting controls cataloging the display of wealth, tuxedos that cost more than his car, dresses that required their own insurance policies, jewelry that caught the chandelier light and threw it back like a challenge. These people moved through the world expecting it to bend around them, and mostly it did. Tony, the executive chef, passed by with a tray of something that probably had a French name Garrett couldn't pronounce. "Hey, Brennan, working Christmas Eve. Bills don't pay themselves. Ain't that the truth?" Tony balanced his tray with the ease of 30 years' practice. "You see the guest list, that's Catherine Ashford coming in at 7, CEO of Tech Finance. Woman's worth more than this entire building. Everyone looks the same when the power goes out." Tony laughed, a bark of genuine amusement. "If I owned this place, you'd be my operations director, no joke. And you'd go bankrupt paying me what I'm worth." The exchange was familiar, comfortable, the camaraderie of working people who understood that skill mattered more than pedigree. Garrett returned to his position, double-checking connections, running through his mental checklist one more time. Whatever happened tonight, it wouldn't be, because he'd missed something. At 7 sharp, a Mercedes S-Class pulled up to the front entrance. The doorman practically genuflected as he opened the rear door. Catherine Ashford emerged first, black evening gown, diamond necklace that probably had its own security detail. The kind of presence that made everyone in her orbit stand a little straighter. She moved like someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. And from what Tony had said, she usually was. But Garrett's attention caught on the small figure that followed her out of the car. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a red velvet dress that should have made her look festive but somehow made her look fragile instead. She clutched a stuffed bear like a life raft, and her eyes, even from this distance, Garrett could see them scan the environment with an intensity that reminded him of Wyatt during those first months after the accident. The girl's head turned, constantly tracking movement, reading lips, compensating. She wore hearing aids, discreet but visible if you knew what to look for. And Garrett knew. He'd spent enough time in audiologists' waiting rooms to recognize the signs of a child navigating a world not built for her needs. Something in his chest tightened. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Or just the universal response of a parent seeing a kid who was struggling while the adults around her remained oblivious. Donovan Pierce arrived next, silver-haired and supremely confident in a way that suggested old money and older connections. He greeted Catherine with the kind of warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes, then glanced down at the girl with an expression Garrett had seen before, the look adults give children they consider inconvenient. "Catherine, wonderful to see you. Tonight's crucial, as we discussed. The board is watching closely." Catherine's smile was professional perfection, revealing nothing. "Everything's under control, Donovan." "Excellent. Though perhaps," he gestured vaguely at the girl, "would a quieter environment be better for Nora stays with me." The words were polite but final, closing the conversation before it could fully form. Garrett filed the exchange away, something political happening here, some undercurrent he didn't fully understand. Not his business. He was here to keep the lights on and the speakers functional, nothing more. But he couldn't stop watching the girl Nora. The way she flinched when someone laughed too loud. How her fingers tightened on the stuffed bear every time the ambient noise level increased. She was drowning in sensation, overwhelmed by input her brain couldn't process into meaning, and nobody seemed to notice. Simone Blake, a woman in her 30s with the sharp efficiency of a professional handler, appeared at Catherine's elbow. Her voice was low, but Garrett's position near a speaker pickup let him hear every word. 15 minutes at the main table for photographs. Then we moved Nora to a side table with Julia. Perfect optics, minimal risk." Catherine's jaw tightened fractionally, but she nodded. "Understood. Risk. They were calling the kid a risk." Garrett felt anger flare hot and immediate in his gut. This child wasn't a problem to be managed. She was a person struggling in an environment designed for everyone except her. The VIP table filled quickly. Thaddeus Monroe commanded immediate attention, 62 years old with steel blue eyes and the kind of presence that suggested he'd built his fortune through sheer force of will. The other investors arranged themselves with the careful choreography of people accustomed to power. Margaret Brennan, venture capital shark in designer heels. Lawrence Torres, real estate mogul with a smile like a threat. Susan Wright, tech industry veteran who'd outlasted 3 generations of Silicon Valley upstarts. Nora was seated beside her mother in a chair too large for her frame. Her feet didn't touch the ground. The table height forced her to crane her neck to see faces, making lip-reading nearly impossible. Around her, conversations exploded in multiple directions: market volatility, quarterly projections, board dynamics, the endless narcissism of people who mistook money for importance. The girl's hearing aids picked up everything and translated it into incomprehensible noise. Garrett could see it in her face, the way her eyes unfocused, slightly overwhelmed by stimulus that provided no information. She was trapped in a prison of sound that meant nothing, surrounded by people who could communicate effortlessly while she remained isolated by her own biology. Catherine was presenting to Monroe, animated and confident in her element. Charts appeared on a tablet. Hand gestures emphasized points about growth trajectories and market positioning. She was brilliant. Garrett could see that even without understanding the content. Every inch the CEO commanding respect through sheer competence and preparation. But her hand rested on the table 6 inches from her daughter's, and that distance might as well have been miles. Catherine's focus was entirely on the deal, on the presentation, on everything except the child beside her. Occasionally she'd pat Nora's hand. An absent gesture, automatic and meaningless. The kind of touch that acknowledged presence without providing connection. Garrett knew that feeling. He'd been that parent once, physically present but mentally absent, too consumed by crisis management to see what his son actually needed. The similarity made him ache. At 7:26, Nora stood up. Just stood so quietly that nobody noticed. The adults were too engaged in their conversations, their negotiations, their performance of importance. The girl clutched her bear and walked away from the table, heading toward the dimmer corridor that led to the restrooms and service areas. Still nobody noticed, except Garrett. His first instinct was professional: notify a manager, let them handle it. But something stopped him. The girl's body language spoke volumes. This wasn't a child who was lost. This was a child who had chosen exile over chaos, who had decided that being alone was better than being surrounded by people who couldn't understand her. He followed at a distance, keeping her in sight. The hallway grew quieter as they moved away from the dining room, the ambient noise dropping to manageable levels. Nora found a corner near a door marked "Maintenance, Staff Only," and simply stopped. Stood there, breathing deep, letting her nervous system settle. The bear was clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Garrett approached slowly, making sure she could see him coming. Sudden movements scared kids, especially kids who'd learned the world was unpredictable. He knelt to bring himself to her eye level, something he'd learned from countless interactions with Wyatt, a way of saying, "I see you as an equal," without using words. Then he did something that would change everything. He placed his hand over his heart and signed, "Hello, are you okay?" The girl's eyes went wide. Actually wide, her whole face transforming from wary resignation to shocked hope in the space of a heartbeat. She stared at his hands like they were performing magic, like they'd just spoken a language she'd thought only existed in dreams. Her own hands moved, trembling slightly, forming words in American Sign Language. You understand me." Garrett smiled, kept signing, letting his voice follow for his own benefit. "Yes, I understand you." The girl's face crumpled and reformed, cycling through emotions too fast to name. Then she started signing rapidly, words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "Nobody here speaks my language. Nobody ever does. Are you real? Is this real?" "I'm real. My name is Garrett. What's yours?" "Nora, do you work here?" "I do. I fix things when they break. Lights, sounds, anything electrical." Nora processed this, her sharp mind visible in her eyes. "Can you fix loneliness?" The question hit like a fist to the solar plexus. 8 years old and already carrying that particular weight, that specific knowledge that isolation could exist in a crowded room. Garrett had to swallow hard before answering. "I can't fix it. but maybe I can make it smaller. Tell me what's wrong." And she did, signed about the noise that hurt her ears through the hearing aids. How everything became distorted and painful. About feeling invisible even when people looked right at her. About her mother being always busy, always focused on something more important than learning to sign. About the way conversations happened around her, never including her, like she was a piece of furniture everyone had agreed to ignore. "Mom loves me," Nora signed, her small hands fierce with conviction. "I know she does, but she doesn't understand me. It's like we're standing next to each other but separated by an ocean, and neither of us knows how to swim." Maybe she wants to understand but doesn't know where to start. "Did you learn sign language for someone?" Garrett pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of Wyatt. "My son, 5 years ago he had an accident. Couldn't hear for several months. The worst part wasn't that he couldn't hear my voice. It was that I couldn't reach him. We were together but completely apart." He swiped to another photo, both of them in a hospital room practicing signs with flashcards, frustrated and determined in equal measure. "Learning this language gave me my son back. It saved our relationship." Nora studied the image with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing it, saving it for later contemplation. "I wish my mom wanted to learn like you did. Maybe she needs someone to show her it's possible, to show her it's worth the work." Something shifted in Nora's expression, a flower opening toward light. She signed the word friend with careful deliberation, making it a question. Garrett repeated the sign back, making it an answer. "Friend." Her smile transformed her entire face. Not the careful, controlled expression she'd worn at dinner, but something genuine and unguarded, pure jig at being understood, at being seen. The sound of her laughter echoed in the hallway, clear and bright and utterly without self-consciousness. That sound would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence, because silence can speak volumes when someone finally learns to listen. Garrett spent the next 10 minutes teaching Nora basic signs, their hands moving through the vocabulary of connection. "This is thank you. This is brave, and that's what you are. This is help. This is safe." Nora practiced each one with the quick absorption of a child whose brain was primed for language acquisition. She was hungry for this, starved for communication that came naturally instead of through constant translation and compensation. "You're really good at this," Garrett signed. "How long have you been learning?" 3 years in school. But nobody at home signs, so I forget sometimes. Use it or lose it, my teacher says. Then we'll practice. I'm going to be working here for a few more hours. If you need anything, if you get overwhelmed again, you come find me. Deal?" Nora's eyes welled up, and for a horrible moment Garrett thought he'd said something wrong. But then she signed, "Nobody's ever said that before, that I could come back, that they'd be here." The simple statement contained universes of loneliness, years of being the child people accommodated but never truly welcomed. Garrett wanted to gather her up and tell her she deserved better, that the world should bend to meet her instead of constantly demanding she contort herself to fit. But he was a stranger in a work uniform, and there were boundaries even kindness couldn't cross. So instead he signed, "I'm here tonight, and I promise you're safe with me." Meanwhile, back at the VIP table, Catherine Ashford was in the middle of explaining her company's Q1 projections when she became aware of an absence. The awareness came slowly, filtering through layers of professional focus until it reached conscious thought. Her hand reached automatically for Nora, found empty space where her daughter should have been. The chair was vacant. Catherine's throat closed. Her next words died unspoken as her eyes swept the dining room with increasing desperation disguised as casual observation. Monroe was still talking, asking about market positioning in Southeast Asia, but his words became static as Catherine's maternal panic overrode everything else. "Excuse me," she managed, standing with forced calm. "I need to check on something." Simone appeared immediately, perfectly attuned to crisis. "What's wrong?" "Nora's gone. I'll help you look, probably just the restroom." But Catherine was already moving heels, clicking against marble with metronomic urgency. She checked the ladies' room first, empty except for an investor's wife reapplying lipstick. The lobby, the coat check, the private dining rooms. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear mixing with guilt, mixing with the horrible knowledge that she'd been so absorbed in the deal that she hadn't noticed her own daughter leaving. A server pointed toward the service corridor when Catherine asked. She walked faster, professional composure cracking. Through a doorway down a hallway that grew progressively less decorated and more utilitarian. And there at the far end, near a maintenance door, she saw them. Nora, with a man in a work uniform. Catherine's first reaction was pure maternal terror. Strange man, isolated location, her vulnerable daughter. She started forward, ready to intervene, to place herself between her child and potential threat. But then something made her stop. Nora was smiling. Not the careful public smile Catherine had learned to recognize as performance. A real smile, the kind that crinkled her eyes and showed her missing tooth, the kind Catherine couldn't remember seeing in months. Maybe years. And the man, 30s or 40s, clean but worn work clothes, tool belt at his hip, was signing. His hands moved with fluid precision, forming words Catherine didn't understand, but Nora clearly did. Her daughter responded, her own hands animated and expressive, in ways Catherine had never witnessed. They were having a conversation. A real, flowing, natural conversation. And Catherine stood there understanding absolutely nothing. The realization hit like ice water through her veins. This stranger was communicating with her daughter better than she had in 8 years. This man she'd never met knew a language she'd spent 8 years refusing to learn. He was giving Nora something Catherine couldn't, the simple gift of being understood in her native tongue. Catherine's hands hung useless at her sides. All her competence, all her intelligence, all her CEO decisiveness meant nothing in this moment. She was fluent in corporate strategy and market analysis and boardroom politics. She could negotiate billion-dollar deals and manage hundreds of employees. But she couldn't talk to her own daughter. The weight of that truth crushed her chest, made breathing difficult. 8 years of decisions paraded through her memory with new clarity. Every canceled ASL tutor appointment, there had been 4 of them over the years, each one sacrificed to some meeting or crisis that had seemed more urgent. Every time she'd told Nora to just write it down because signing was too slow. Every specialist appointment focused on making Nora more normal, rather than meeting her where she actually existed. Catherine had spent a fortune trying to fix her daughter's deafness. Tens of thousands on hearing aids and cochlear implant consultations and speech therapy and auditory training. But she'd never spent 1 hour seriously learning Nora's language, because learning ASL would mean accepting that Nora would always be deaf. And Catherine had spent 8 years fighting that acceptance, trying to control the one thing that couldn't be controlled. Brian appeared at her elbow, startling her. "Ms. Ashford, is everything all right? I noticed your daughter with one of our technicians." Catherine forced her CEO voice, the one that brooked no argument. "Everything's fine. He was helping. We have protocols about staff interaction with guests, especially children." "I said it's fine." The words came out sharper than intended. Garrett must have seen them or sensed the attention, because he stood smoothly and turned to face them. Up close, Catherine could see he was older than she'd initially thought, maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that suggested outdoor work and honest labor. His eyes were kind. He spoke and signed simultaneously, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Ma'am, your daughter seemed overwhelmed. I was making sure she was safe." Brian's expression suggested he was preparing to intervene to enforce those protocols he'd mentioned. Catherine made a split-second decision based on nothing but instinct and the memory of Nora's genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan, Garrett Brennan. Mr. Brennan, I appreciate you looking after Nora. She does have difficulty in crowded environments." An awkward silence stretched between them. Catherine desperately wanted to ask what they'd been talking about. Wanted to join the conversation, wanted to connect with her daughter the way this stranger had managed in mere minutes. But she didn't know the language. Literally didn't know it. And that ignorance was a chasm she couldn't cross. Simone materialized with impeccable timing and terrible interruption. Catherine Monroe is asking for you. We're ready to discuss final terms. The pull of two worlds, the one she'd built through 15 years of relentless work, and the one she'd failed to build with her daughter. Catherine looked at Nora, saw her daughter's body language, the way she was oriented toward Garrett rather than toward her own mother. The way she seemed smaller somehow when Catherine appeared, like she was preparing to take up less space. Sweetheart, I need to go back to the table. Will you stay here for a few minutes? Nora's nod was resigned, expected. She'd clearly learned not to hope for more than fragments of her mother's attention. Garrett spoke up before Catherine could spiral further into guilt. There's a quieter break room down this hallway, ma'am. Less noise, more comfortable. I could show her if that's all right. It should have set off every parental alarm. Letting her daughter go with a stranger to an isolated location violated every safety rule Catherine had ever learned. But something in Garrett's eyes, or maybe something in the way Nora trusted him, instantly overrode those concerns. Please, that would be... Thank you. Catherine returned to the VIP table, but everything had shifted. Monroe was talking about market penetration in emerging economies, and she heard herself responding with the right data points, the correct analysis. But part of her mind remained in that hallway, watching her daughter communicate in a language Catherine didn't speak, feeling the growing certainty that she'd spent 8 years solving the wrong problem. Monroe leaned forward, diamond cufflinks catching light. Ms. Ashford, you seem distracted. Is this deal not important to you? Catherine met his gaze, forcing focus. It's extremely important, Mr. Monroe. I apologize. But internally, she was asking herself a question she'd been avoiding for 8 years. What good was building an empire if she couldn't talk to the person she'd built it for? In the staff break room, Garrett was learning that Nora was far smarter than most adults gave her credit for. She asked questions about his work, not childish questions, but genuine curiosity about how electrical systems worked. Why some lights flickered, what made speakers produce sound. She absorbed his explanations like a sponge, making connections and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated real understanding. So electricity is kind of like water in pipes, Nora signed. It flows and you have to make sure the pipes don't leak. That's exactly right. Most people don't understand it that well. Most people don't want to understand, they just want things to work. The observation was far too astute for an 8-year-old. Garrett wondered what other insights Nora had developed through years of watching people who thought she couldn't fully comprehend the world around her. Your mom, he ventured carefully, does she know sign language? Nora's face fell. No. She tried to learn once, I think, but she was too busy. She's always too busy. Being a CEO is demanding. I know, I'm not stupid. The signs were sharp, almost angry. I know her work is important, but sometimes I think, if I could hear, she'd have more time for me. If I was normal, I wouldn't be so much trouble. Garrett's radio crackled before he could respond, Brian's voice requesting a sound check in the main dining room. Duty called, pulling him back to the job he was actually being paid to perform. He signed to Nora, I have to work now. But you can stay here if you want or come watch what I do, your choice. Nora's eyes lit up. Can I really come? As long as you stay close and don't touch anything, safety first. They returned to the dining area together, and Garrett tried to ignore the stares the wealthy guests, wondering why a maintenance worker had a child in tow, the judgment implicit in their expressions. But Nora seemed oblivious to the scrutiny, fascinated instead by Garrett's explanation of the sound system's mixer board and equalization controls. He was showing her how frequency adjustments worked when the universe decided to remind him that nothing stays stable for long. The feedback started as a whine, rapidly escalating to a shriek that made every person in the restaurant cover their ears. For Nora, with her hearing aids amplifying the sound directly into her ear canals, it was torture. She dropped to her knees, hands clamped over her ears, face contorted in agony. Garrett moved on pure instinct, scooped Nora up, turned his body to shield her from the speakers, and ran for the main audio control while signing frantically with one hand. Take out your hearing aids now. Close your eyes. He reached the power switch and killed everything. Blessed silence descended, broken only by confused murmurs and the distant clatter of dropped silverware. Then the lights flickered once, twice, 3 times before dimming to emergency backup mode. The entire restaurant sat in semi-darkness, Christmas tree lights guttering, chandelier reduced to a fraction of its glory. Monroe's voice cut through the chaos, irritated and imperious. "What kind of establishment is this?" Garrett barely heard him. His entire focus was on the sobbing child in his arms, on making sure she was okay, on getting her somewhere safe, while he figured out what had just catastrophically failed. Catherine appeared out of the gloom, reaching for her daughter with desperation written across her features. "Nora, baby, are you okay? Are you hurt?" But Nora couldn't hear her mother's questions, had removed her hearing aids as instructed, and Catherine didn't know how to sign them. Garrett found himself in the strange position of translator, signing Catherine's words to Nora and voicing Nora's signed responses back to her mother. "She's not hurt, scared, overwhelmed, ears ringing, but not injured." Catherine's face crumpled slightly before she caught herself reconstructing her CEO mask. "What happened?" "System failure. I need to check the electrical panel immediately. You need to stay away from my daughter." The accusation stung, particularly because Garrett understood where it came from. But Nora was signing frantically, and Garrett translated, "He didn't hurt me. He helped me. He made it stop hurting." Catherine stared at her daughter's moving hands, comprehending nothing. The expression on her face was devastating, a mother rendered mute before her own child, unable to understand the most basic communication. For a moment, Garrett saw past the CEO to the human being underneath, and what he saw was someone drowning in her own choices. Brian was hovering, panicked. "Garrett, can you fix this? Give me 10 minutes. He made sure Nora was secure in Catherine's arms, the handoff gentle but definite, and headed for the electrical room at a run. Behind him, he heard Nora signing something, heard Catherine's frustrated voice. "I don't understand, sweetheart. I don't understand." The electrical panel told a story, and it wasn't a good one. Garrett's headlamp illuminated the damage. Multiple wires deliberately loosened one circuit breaker, wedged partially open with what looked like a metal shim, burn marks indicating intentional overload. This wasn't equipment failure or poor maintenance. This was sabotage. Someone had wanted tonight to fail. Someone had deliberately engineered this chaos, timing it for maximum impact during the most important dinner Heritage had hosted all year. The fingerprints in the dust on the panel cover were recent, the disturbance pattern clear even in inadequate light. Garrett documented everything with his phone's camera, then shifted into repair mode. Bypassing damaged circuits, rerouting power through backup systems, replacing blown fuses, testing loads before restore. His hands moved with the confidence of 15 years' experience, each action precise and purposeful. This was what he did. This was what he was good at. In a world that increasingly valued degrees over skill, Garrett's knowledge was irreplaceable. 11 minutes later, the lights came back up. Music resumed at a more reasonable volume. The Christmas tree blazed back to full glory. Polite applause rippled through the dining room, though the damage to the evening's atmosphere had already been done. Garrett returned to find Catherine attempting to comfort Nora through proximity alone, simply holding her daughter close without any shared language to ease the fear. Several investors were preparing to leave, checking watches and making excuses. Monroe looked skeptical, like a man reconsidering his decisions. And Donovan Pierce wore an expression that made Garrett's instincts flare, satisfaction quickly smoothed into appropriate concern. The older man had wanted this dinner to fail. Garrett would bet his last dollar on it, but proving sabotage and navigating wealthy people's politics were far above Garrett's pay grade. He was here to fix electrical systems, nothing more. His job was done. In an hour, he'd collect his overtime pay and return to his real life. Except when he looked at Nora still trembling in her mother's arms, he knew he couldn't just walk away. That kid deserved better than a world that couldn't speak her language. And her mother, CEO or not, deserved a chance to learn. What Garrett didn't know, couldn't know, was that the worst of the night was still coming. The real test hadn't even begun. In the staff break room, Garrett was discovering that Nora possessed the kind of intelligence most adults underestimated on sight. She asked questions about electrical systems, not childish questions, but genuine curiosity about cause and effect, about how invisible forces became visible results. Her hands shaped inquiries with the precision of someone who'd learned that communication required effort, that every word mattered because every word might be the last one someone bothered to understand. So electricity is like water through pipes. Her signs were careful, deliberate. It flows from high pressure to low pressure. Exactly right. Most adults never understand it that clearly. Most adults don't want to understand. They just want things to work. The observation carried weight beyond her 8 years, the kind of insight that came from watching people take for granted what she could never assume. Garrett's radio crackled with Brian's voice requesting his presence at the soundboard. The dining room needed him, the job needed him, the wealthy people who paid his salary needed their entertainment systems functioning properly. Duty pulled at him with insistent fingers, but he found himself reluctant to leave this conversation, this connection with a child who reminded him so much of his own son during those dark months of isolation. I have to work now, but you can come with me if you want. See how everything operates, your choice. The transformation was immediate. Nora's entire posture changed from defensive crouch to eager attention, her hands practically vibrating with excitement. Really, I can watch? As long as you stay beside me and keep your hands to yourself unless I say otherwise. Professional sites have safety rules for good reasons. They returned to the dining area where wealth and anxiety mixed into volatile atmosphere. The power restoration had salvaged the evening's technical aspects, but the psychological damage lingered like smoke after fire. Garrett positioned himself at the soundboard, running diagnostics while explaining each step to Nora. She absorbed information like a sponge drinks water, asking questions that demonstrated genuine comprehension rather than polite interest. Several guests stared at them. The maintenance worker with a child in tow violated some unspoken protocol of class boundaries, some assumption about who belonged in spaces where money flowed like champagne. But Garrett had stopped caring about those judgments years ago. His ex-wife's voice still echoed, sometimes telling him he lacked ambition, that he should want more than honest work and a paycheck that kept the lights on. But Wyatt had taught him that ambition came in different forms, that providing stability and love mattered more than climbing ladders that led nowhere he wanted to go. He was adjusting frequency response, showing Nora how the equalizer affected different ranges of sound when the universe served up its second crisis of the evening. The feedback began as a low whine, barely perceptible at first. Then it escalated, climbing through frequencies with malicious speed until it became a shriek that could shatter glass and sanity in equal measure. Every person in Heritage Restaurant clamped hands over ears, faces contorting in pain. Wine glasses vibrated on tables, the sound waves making liquid shimmer and dance. The Christmas tree's ornaments hummed in sympathetic resonance, creating an unholy chorus of suffering. For Nora, the agony was magnified 1,000-fold. Her hearing aids amplified the sound directly into ear canals already sensitized by previous trauma. She collapsed as if struck, hands pressed so hard against her head that her fingers went white, mouth open in a scream nobody could hear beneath the feedback's assault. Garrett moved without thought, operating on instinct honed through 5 years of responding to his son's needs. He scooped the girl up, turned to shield her from the speaker arrays, and sprinted toward the main power control while his free hand signed frantically. Hearing aids out, close your eyes, count backwards from 100. His fingers found the emergency cutoff. Silence crashed down like a physical force, shocking in its completeness, the sudden absence of noise almost as disorienting as the noise itself. Then lights flickered once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, before the entire electrical system surrendered. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the restaurant in the pale green luminescence of backup power. The chandeliers died. The Christmas tree's 1,000 lights guttered to nothing. Darkness swallowed the room's corners, leaving only essential illumination for safe evacuation. Chaos erupted in whispers and movement. Monroe stood, his face carved from irritation and disbelief. This is unacceptable. What kind of operation allows repeated failures during a single evening? Other investors murmured agreement, their voices carrying the particular edge of people who'd just witnessed incompetence they couldn't tolerate. Several were already gathering coats, making apologetic noises about prior commitments and early morning flights. The deal Catherine had spent months constructing was disintegrating in real time, each departing guest taking a piece of her company's future with them. But Garrett barely registered the collateral damage. His entire world had narrowed to the trembling child in his arms, to making sure Nora was physically unharmed, even if psychologically devastated. Catherine materialized from the gloom, reaching for her daughter with hands that shook despite their owner's best efforts at control. Nora, baby, what happened? Are you hurt? Talk to me. Nora couldn't hear. The questions had removed her hearing aids as instructed, and Catherine's hands hung useless, unable to form the words her mouth spoke. The disconnect was painful to witness, like watching two people on opposite sides of soundproof glass desperately trying to communicate through barriers they didn't know how to breach. Garrett found himself translating his hands, interpreting Catherine's spoken concern into visual language Nora could parse. Your mom wants to know if you're hurt. Nora signed back, her movements still shaky but clear, precise despite the trauma. Not hurt, scared, ears ringing bad, but okay. He saved me. Garrett voiced the response for Catherine, who looked at her daughter's moving hands with an expression that suggested she was watching ancient hieroglyphics. Mysterious, important, completely incomprehensible. The frustration in her face was palpable. The helplessness of a woman accustomed to solving problems confronting one she had no tools to address. What happened to the system? Catherine's CEO voice had returned, searching for someone to hold accountable for something she could control in a situation rapidly spiraling beyond her grasp. System failure. Could be the same issue as before or something new. I need to check the electrical panel immediately. You need to... Catherine stopped herself, visibly swallowing whatever accusation had been forming. Her eyes went to Nora, saw the way her daughter was clinging to Garrett rather than reaching for her own mother, and something in her face cracked before she forced it back into professional neutrality. Brian appeared, sweating through his shirt despite the December cold seeping through inadequate insulation. Garrett, please tell me you can fix this, please. Give me 10 minutes, maybe 15. He transferred Nora to Catherine's arms, making the handoff gentle but definitive. The girl went reluctantly, her hands already forming questions. Her mother couldn't read her eyes, seeking Garrett's face for reassurance Catherine couldn't provide. Catherine's expression as she accepted her daughter showed such raw vulnerability that Garrett had to look away. Some pain was too intimate for strangers to witness, too personal to acknowledge without invitation. The electrical room's panel told a story that turned Garrett's blood cold. His headlamp revealed systematic destruction masquerading as malfunction. 3 circuit breakers had been deliberately forced open with metal shims, precision work, not random damage. Wire connections showed tool marks from recent tampering, the copper still bright where insulation had been stripped back beyond safety margins. Burn patterns across the bus bars indicated someone had created an intentional short circuit, timing it to overload at peak demand. This wasn't accident or negligence. This was sabotage executed by someone with electrical knowledge and malicious intent. Garrett documented everything methodically. Photos from multiple angles capturing the evidence in harsh LED light. Close-ups of the shim marks, the distinctive tool impressions that could identify the equipment used. The dust pattern on the access panel showing fingerprints from entry within the last 2 hours. His work logs proved he'd checked this panel at 6:15 and found it secure. Someone had accessed it between 6:30 and 8, deliberately engineering failure for maximum impact during Heritage's most important event of the year. The why nagged at him like a splinter under skin. Random vandalism seemed unlikely in a restaurant this exclusive, with security protocols and employee vetting and the kind of clientele that demanded safety. Competitor sabotage possible but overcomplicated. There were easier ways to damage a restaurant's reputation. No, this felt personal, targeted. Someone wanted tonight specifically to fail. Wanted Catherine Ashford's critical dinner to collapse into chaos witnessed by the investors who controlled her company's future. Donovan Pierce's satisfied expression replayed in Garrett's memory. The man had looked pleased when the systems failed, had immediately suggested reconvening another time, had used the crisis to question Catherine's control and competence. Benefit plus opportunity usually equaled motive, but Garrett was a tradesman, not a detective. His job was fixing broken systems, not unraveling corporate conspiracies or playing amateur sleuth in dramas that existed far above his social station. He rebuilt the circuit routing, bypassing damaged sections and redistributing loads across undamaged breakers. The work required focus and precision. One mistake could cause cascading failures, or worse, an electrical fire that would truly end the evening in disaster. Garrett's hands moved with unconscious competence. Muscle memory guiding wire placements and connection tightening, while his mind calculated load factors and safety margins. 12 minutes after Catherine's world had plunged into darkness, light returned. The chandelier blazed back to full glory, its crystal prisms throwing rainbows across white tablecloths. The Christmas tree rekindled, its 1,000 points of colored radiance, ornaments glittering like promises. Background music resumed at carefully modulated volume, no longer threatening to shatter eardrums. Applause rippled through the dining room, though it sounded more relieved than celebratory, more grateful that ordeal had ended than impressed by its resolution. Garrett emerged to find the evening's social architecture permanently altered. Several investor couples had already departed, unwilling to stake fortunes on a CEO who couldn't maintain basic infrastructure during a critical presentation. Monroe remained, but his body language suggested he was one more disruption away from leaving, one more failure away from writing Catherine off as too chaotic to trust with $400 million. Catherine stood near the VIP table, Nora beside her in a chair, and even from across the room, Garrett could see the desperation Catherine was working to conceal behind professional composure. Then Simone Blake materialized at Catherine's elbow, leaning close to whisper with urgent intensity. Catherine's face went pale, then carefully blank, the kind of studied neutrality that suggested panic being forcibly suppressed. Whatever news Simone delivered, it wasn't good. It was in fact catastrophic. "We have another problem." Simone's voice carried just far enough for Garrett to hear as he approached to confirm systems were stable. "The USB drive with all the financial projections and contract terms, it's missing." Catherine's control fractured for a microsecond before reassembling. "That's not possible. It was in my briefcase. I saw it there before we left the office. I've checked everywhere. Briefcase, coat pockets, purse under tables in the restroom. It's gone." The stakes crashed into focus with brutal clarity. Without those files, the deal couldn't close tonight. Legal documentation required specific financial disclosures that existed only on that drive. Delay meant renegotiation. Renegotiation meant opportunity for board members. Board members like Donovan Pierce to raise objections and questions and concerns that could unravel months of careful negotiation. The USB drive wasn't just data storage. It was the key to Catherine's future, to her ability to maintain control of the company she'd built from nothing into something worth $400 million. Donovan manifested as if summoned by thoughts of opportunism, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression carrying calculated concern. "This is deeply troubling, Catherine. First, electrical failures, now missing sensitive documents. It suggests systemic organizational problems." Monroe was listening, his sharp investor's mind clearly running similar calculations. "Perhaps we should indeed reconvene when circumstances are more stable. James, please." Catherine's voice held an edge Garrett hadn't heard before, something raw beneath the CEO polish. "These technical issues don't reflect the fundamentals of the deal. They reflect your ability to manage complex operations under pressure, which is precisely what I'm investing in. If you can't control a dinner party, how can I trust you to control a company?" Simone, whether intentionally or through nervous energy, pushed forward with a suggestion that made Garrett's stomach drop. Should we review security footage, see who had access to the VIP area? Brian pulled up the feed on his tablet, scrubbing through timestamps while Garrett watched with growing dread. The camera showed the service corridor, coat check area, and edges of the VIP section. Various staff moved through frame servers carrying trays, kitchen personnel hustling between stations. The sommelier making his rounds with wine recommendations. And there, time-stamped at 8:07, was Garrett. Visible in the corridor near where bags and coats were stored, visible minutes before the second system failure, visible in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Simone's finger stabbed at the screen with prosecutorial precision. That maintenance worker had unrestricted access. He was everywhere tonight. Donovan's voice carried the false concern of someone who'd found exactly what they were looking for. We should question him thoroughly. Due diligence requires it, for everyone's peace of mind. Catherine's eyes met Garrett's across the room. He saw her internal war, the professional instinct to protect the deal versus the personal knowledge that he'd helped Nora, that he'd shown her daughter more key in an hour than most people managed in a lifetime. The scales were tipping toward professional necessity, and Garrett couldn't blame her. $400 million versus the word of a maintenance man she'd met tonight. The math was brutal but undeniable. The world had taught him long ago that men like him were disposable, that when push came to shove, class trumped character every single time. George Harper Heritage's security director approached with the apologetic efficiency of someone following protocols they personally found distasteful. Ex-cop Garrett guessed from the bearing and the way he moved, always aware of exits and sightlines and potential threats, the habits of law enforcement never quite fading, even years after the badge was turned in. Sir, I need to ask you some questions about missing property. What property? Garrett kept his voice level, non-confrontational. Getting defensive would only make things worse, would confirm their suspicions that he had something to hide. A USB drive containing sensitive business documents has gone missing. We're checking everyone who had access to the VIP area tonight. Standard procedure in theft investigations. I've been fixing your electrical system for the last 4 hours. Haven't touched anyone's personal belongings. I'm sure, but I still need to check your equipment bag. Protocol, you understand, nothing personal. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Refusing would look guilty, would give them ammunition, and he had nothing to hide beyond the bruising indignity of being treated as a suspect because of his collar color and social position. Go ahead. The search was thorough and humiliating. George emptied Garrett's toolkit piece by piece onto a table where everyone could watch, where the performance of suspicion played out for an audience of wealthy spectators. Multimeter. Wire strippers, voltage tester, spare fuses, electrical tape, work gloves, a water bottle, protein bar wrapper, his phone with its cracked screen, his wallet showing the driver's license photo from 3 years ago. When he'd still believed his marriage might survive, when he'd still had hope. That love could overcome class differences and disappointed expectations. Investors watched with the uncomfortable fascination of people observing someone else's degradation. Unable to look away from the spectacle even as they recognized its inherent unfairness. Servers paused in their duties, uncertain whether to intervene or pretend not to notice. The sommelier studied his wine list with sudden intense interest, everyone performing their role in the theater of class dynamics, where blue-collar workers existed under permanent suspicion while wealth conferred automatic innocence. The door burst open with enough force to make everyone turn. Wyatt stumbled through his 10-year-old face, flushed from running, his eyes scanning frantically until they found his father. Logan's parents must have had their emergency and dropped him off early, must have thought they were doing Garrett a favor by bringing his son to his workplace. The boy took in the scene with terrible comprehension, his father surrounded by security and suspicious strangers, his toolkit spread across a table like evidence at a crime scene. The accusation hanging in the air like smoke. Dad, what's happening? Why are they doing this to you? Garrett's heart cracked down the middle. His son shouldn't have to see this. Shouldn't have to learn this early, that the world would always assume the worst of people like them, that competence and character meant nothing when measured against the assumptions of those who'd never had to fight for respect. It's okay, Wyatt. Just a misunderstanding. Everything's fine. But Wyatt could read his father too well after 10 years together, 5 of those years connected by sign language that made lying nearly impossible when hands revealed what voices tried to hide. The boy saw the humiliation Garrett was working so hard to conceal, saw the injustice of powerful people treating his father like a criminal for no reason beyond proximity and class. Nora appeared beside Wyatt, her hands moving in rapid signs, her face showing distress that mirrored his own. "Is your dad in trouble because of me? Because he helped me?" Wyatt signed back, his movements jerky with distress, with the particular anger of someone watching their hero diminished. "I don't know. Maybe. People always blame my dad when things go wrong. They think because he works with his hands he must be stupid or dishonest. That's not fair. He's the nicest person here. He's the only one who saw me. Fair doesn't matter when you're not rich." George completed his search, finding nothing because there was nothing to find, because Garrett hadn't stolen anything and never would. "Your bag is clear, Mr. Brennan. Told you." Garrett kept his voice even, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing how deep the accusation cut. How much it cost him to maintain dignity in the face of casual cruelty disguised as procedure. But the damage was done. The investors had watched him be searched like a common thief. Catherine had seen him suspected and investigated. His dignity had been stripped in front of his son, and no clean toolkit would restore what the accusation had taken. What the assumption of guilt had stolen from him in ways no USB drive could match. Simone pressed forward, either oblivious to or uncaring about the human cost. "The timing is still suspicious. The electrical failures, then the theft, all while he had access." Nora exploded into motion. The 8-year-old girl walked straight into the center of the VIP area, positioning herself where everyone could see her, where her presence demanded attention even from people who'd spent the entire evening treating her as decorative background. She set down her stuffed bear with deliberate ceremony, making space for what she needed to say, for the testimony she needed to deliver. Then her hands began to move. The signs came fast and furious, her small hands slicing through air with passionate precision, with the accumulated frustration of 8 years spent being invisible to people who could see. She was speaking, truly speaking, in her native language, delivering a testimony that mattered more than any adult's opinion, that carried more truth than any security footage or circumstantial evidence. "He didn't steal anything. He's a good man. He helped me when I was scared and nobody else cared. He fixed the noise when it hurt me. He protected me. Why are you being mean to him? Why are you punishing kindness? This is wrong. You are wrong." The words were invisible to everyone except those who knew the language. Monroe saw a child making gestures, her face contorted with emotion he couldn't interpret. The other investors exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure how to respond to a deaf child's visible distress, uncertain whether her movements constituted communication or merely theatrical display. One investor whispered to another, "What is she doing?" The whole room watched Nora speak and heard nothing at all. Her testimony, her defense, her passionate declaration of truth fell on ears that couldn't process silence into meaning, that needed sound to recognize communication, that mistook her language for pantomime. Catherine's face showed comprehension without understanding. She knew her daughter was defending Garrett, but couldn't parse the specific words, couldn't translate passion into language, couldn't bridge the gap her own choices had created. The shame of that ignorance must have been overwhelming, because Catherine dropped to her knees beside Nora despite the evening gown, despite the investors watching, despite every professional instinct that said, maintain distance, and control that said, CEOs don't kneel. Catherine's hands moved clumsily, forming signs that were clearly wrong. Her face tight with concentration and desperation. "What are you saying, sweetheart? I'm trying to understand." Nora caught her mother's hands, corrected the finger positions, shaped them into proper signs with the patience of someone who'd spent years teaching without recognition. Then slowly, painfully slowly for both of them. He didn't do bad thing. The simple sentence took 30 seconds to convey. 30 seconds of a CEO learning her own inadequacy while her company's future hung in the balance. While investors watched and judged and calculated whether this woman could be trusted with their money when she couldn't communicate with her own shit. When Catherine stood and faced the room, her voice carried absolute conviction, the kind of certainty that came from finally understanding what mattered. My daughter just gave testimony. Most of you didn't understand it because she spoke in American Sign Language, a language I should have learned 8 years ago, but didn't. Because I was too busy, too focused on everything except what mattered most. She paused, letting the admission settle. She said Mr. Brennan is innocent, that he protected her, that he helped her when she needed help, and I believe her. Donovan scoffed, his carefully constructed sympathy cracking into condescension. Catherine, she's 8 years old. She doesn't comprehend the complexities of corporate espionage, or she comprehends more than anyone here. Catherine's words cut like surgical steel, precise and devastating. She reads people because she has to. She sees truth because lies require sound to hide in, because deception relies on tone and inflection she can't hear. My daughter can't be fooled by smooth voices or persuasive rhetoric. She only sees what people actually are, and she says he's innocent. Monroe watched this exchange with the assessment of someone calculating character against capital. Most CEOs would sacrifice anyone for a $400 million deal. Then I'm not most CEOs, and if that's a problem for you, then this isn't the right partnership. Apparently not. Interesting choice, Ms. Ashford. Very interesting indeed. Monroe's expression remained unreadable, his poker face perfected through decades of high-stakes negotiations. Catherine held his gaze without flinching, without the desperate pleading most people in her position would display. My daughter's word matters more than any contract. Her judgment is worth more than any investment. If believing her costs me everything I've built, then I'll start building again tomorrow. But I won't betray her trust. Not for 400 million, not for anything. Real love isn't about finding the easy path. It's about walking the hard path together, even when the cost seems unbearable, even when everything you've worked for hangs in the balance. The room held its breath. Garrett watched his future employment and Catherine's corporate control balance on the edge of a knife made from principle and desperation. Then something unexpected happened. Garrett spoke, his voice carrying the rough authority of someone who'd found evidence rather than theory. Mr. Morrison, may I show everyone something? Brian looked uncertain but nodded. Garrett pulled out his phone, opened the photos he'd taken in the electrical room. The system didn't fail by accident. Someone sabotaged it, deliberately, tonight. He swiped through images explaining what civilians wouldn't understand. These are fresh tool marks. This is a shim wedged to force a circuit open. These burn patterns show intentional overload. I checked this panel at 6:15, everything was secure. Someone accessed it between 6:30 and 8, right before both failures. This wasn't accident or negligence, this was engineered. Catherine's face transformed as she processed implications, as connections clicked into place with the clarity of sudden understanding. Who would sabotage my dinner? Someone who benefits from it failing, someone who wants you to look incompetent in front of investors who control your future, someone who orchestrated chaos to manufacture evidence of poor leadership. The accusation hung unspoken but understood. Everyone's eyes shifted to Donovan Pierce, whose expression had gone carefully neutral. Too neutral, the kind of studied blankness that suggested guilt pretending to be innocence. That's a serious allegation with no evidence connecting it to anyone specifically, Donovan said smoothly, his voice maintaining its polished calm even as his eyes betrayed concern. Sabotage could be random vandalism, a disgruntled employee, competitor, espionage. Pointing fingers without proof is irresponsible and potentially libelous. Garrett wasn't a detective or investigator. His expertise ended at electrical systems and basic human observation. but he'd seen enough job sites and corporate politics to recognize patterns of benefit and blame to understand who gained when others lost. The access panel requires a key. How many people have keys to your electrical rooms, Mr. Morrison? Brian's face went pale as he understood where this was heading. Just me and the facilities manager. And contractors we hire, but they have to sign in at the staff entrance. We keep logs. Check your sign-in log. See if anyone accessed as a contractor tonight. George was already pulling records on his tablet, scrolling through the evening's entries with increasing focus. His finger stopped at a specific line, his expression shifting from professional to grim. Here, signed in at 6:15, electrical contractor referred by Pierce, listed as performing routine maintenance check. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. All eyes swung to Donovan, whose mask finally cracked into something resembling anger mixed with resignation, the expression of someone who'd been outmaneuvered by a maintenance worker with a smartphone and basic deductive reasoning. This proves nothing. Someone could have used my name without authorization. Let's check the security footage from the electrical room. George was already scrubbing through camera feeds, finding angles that covered the utility areas. There. 6:47. Man in contractor's uniform wearing a cap pulled low. Can't see his face clearly, but the body language, the gait. The figure's movements were distinctive. The way he carried his shoulders, the slight favor of his left leg. Small mannerisms that suggested identity even without facial recognition. And when he turned slightly toward the camera, his profile caught enough light to confirm he wasn't a stranger to this building or these people. Simone made a small sound of recognition and distress, her hand rising to cover her mouth. I know him. That's Marcus Reed. He does consultation work for various companies. Donovan's hired him for projects before troubleshooting, competitive intelligence gathering, that sort of thing. The conspiracy was unraveling in real-time threads, pulling loose to reveal the framework beneath. Donovan had orchestrated the sabotage, had used tonight's dinner as manufactured evidence of Catherine's incompetence, had planned to leverage the chaos into forcing her removal as CEO. Catherine's face showed betrayal beneath the shock, the particular pain of someone realizing they'd been stabbed by a friend. Donovan, we built this company together. 15 years of partnership, 15 years of trusting each other. How could you do this? Donovan's expression hardened into something closer to his actual feelings. The mask gone, revealing the man who'd spent months building this particular trap. Because you're destroying what we built. Look at the numbers, Catherine. Really look at them, not through the rose-colored glasses of maternal devotion. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, spread documents across the table with the confidence of someone who'd prepared this presentation carefully. Quarterly earnings down 18% year over year. You've missed 40% of executive meetings in the last 18 months, all for Nora's appointments and therapy sessions and school events. 3 major clients left for competitors, citing lack of leadership attention. Stock price declining steadily. The board sees it, the market sees it, everyone sees it except you. His voice carried genuine frustration rather than performative anger. The conviction of someone who believed they were right despite the methods being wrong. You can't be a fully committed CEO while managing a special needs child. Something has to give. Someone has to make the hard decision. I was trying to force you to make the choice you're too stubborn to make yourself. Step down, let someone with full attention run the company, spend time with Nora. It's better for everyone, the company, the employees, the shareholders, and most importantly, your daughter, who needs you more than tech finance does. The gray villain revealed. Not evil, not motivated by greed or hatred or simple malice. Just someone who'd decided he knew best, who'd convinced himself that betrayal was actually rescue, that destroying someone's career was somehow saving them from themselves. Catherine's response came quiet but absolute, with the finality of a door closing forever. You're right about one thing. Something has to give. Donovan looked hopeful for a moment, thinking he'd won despite the exposure, thinking his logic had finally penetrated her stubborn resistance. But it's not going to be my daughter. Catherine's voice strengthened with each word gaining power from certainty rather than volume. I'd rather lose every dollar I've ever made than lose the reason I made it. I'd rather fail as a CEO than succeed as a mother who taught her child that ambition matters more than family, that money matters more than connection, that building empires justifies abandoning the people those empires were supposed to serve. She paused, making sure everyone heard the next words clearly. You say I have to choose between company and daughter. I refuse that choice. I reject that framework entirely. I'll restructure how I do both. Delegate operations better, trust my team. More work, smarter instead of longer. But I won't abandon either. And I certainly won't abandon my principles on the advice of someone who just sabotaged my dinner to prove a point. Simone was crying now, her mascara running in dark streams down her face. I'm sorry, I didn't know about the sabotage, I swear. Donovan just said we needed to create situations that highlighted decision-making problems, media moments that demonstrated the distraction Nora caused. I thought it was PR strategy, reputation management. I didn't know he'd go this far. I never would have agreed to actual sabotage. You enabled it, Catherine said, her voice carrying more disappointment than anger. You helped create the environment where this seemed acceptable. That makes you complicit even if you didn't know the full extent. Monroe had been watching this entire drama unfold with the fascinated attention of someone witnessing character revelation in real time, seeing beneath the polished surfaces to the actual humans underneath. Now he stood and every eye in the room turned to him, waiting for the verdict that would determine Catherine's future. Ms. Ashford, I've seen many CEO pitches in my 40 years as an investor. Impressive presentations, glossy projections, promises of exponential growth backed by sophisticated financial modeling. His face remained unreadable, his tone giving nothing away. But tonight I saw something far more valuable. I saw integrity under pressure. I saw someone choose principle over profit, character over capital, truth over expedience. You defended an innocent man when it would have been easier to sacrifice him. You believed your daughter when every incentive pushed you to dismiss her. You exposed corruption even though it damaged your own pitch. He extended his hand across the table. That's character. That's leadership. That's exactly the kind of person I want running a company I invest in. You have your deal, Ms. Ashford. $400 million at preferred terms, standard board representation. Contract closes Friday morning. The other investors nodded agreement, a chorus of approval that felt almost anticlimactic after the evening's drama. Margaret Brennan actually smiled, her venture capital hardness softening slightly. It took real courage to do what you just did. That's worth more than any financial projection. You'll do right by our investment because you just proved you'll do right when it matters. Catherine's relief was palpable but controlled. She shook Monroe's hand, accepted the congratulations, maintained her CEO composure even as the weight of success and vindication threatened to buckle her knees. Then she turned to Garrett and her expression shifted from professional to genuinely personal. Mr. Brennan, I owe you more than gratitude. You protected my daughter when I couldn't. You exposed a conspiracy when everyone else accepted the obvious narrative. You stood firm when falsely accused, maintaining dignity that puts most of us to shame. That's extraordinary character. Garrett shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise from people in suits that cost more than his car, uncertain how to accept recognition from someone who existed in a different social stratosphere. Just did what was right, ma'am. Anyone would have done the same. No, not anyone. Most people would have walked away, would have stayed invisible, would have protected themselves rather than a child they'd just met. Catherine's voice carried absolute certainty. I want to offer you a position, Director of Facilities and Accessibility at Tech Finance Corporation. The title hit like a physical blow. Director, not maintenance worker or technician or contractor. Director with everything that implied respect, authority. The assumption of competence rather than suspicion. Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have a college degree. I'm a tradesman, not corporate management material. You have 16 years of practical experience, problem-solving skills most MBAs can't match, and integrity that's apparently rarer than I thought. Catherine's face was serious businesslike. Salary $95,000 annually, full benefits package including health, dental, vision. Stock options vesting over 4 years, flexible scheduling. It's what you're worth, probably less than you're worth, but it's what I can justify to the board without extensive documentation. Garrett's mind calculated frantically. $95,000, nearly triple his current income. Enough to pay off Wyatt's medical bills in 6 months instead of 6 years. Enough for savings, for security, for college funds. For the kind of stability he'd been chasing since his wife left and took half their assets and all his confidence. But it also meant leaving the world he understood for one where he'd be perpetually out of place. Office politics instead of job sites. Business meetings instead of electrical panels. Wearing button-down shirts instead of coveralls. The constant awareness that he didn't belong, that everyone could see he was a fraud in business casual, that his lack of formal education marked him as fundamentally different from the people he'd be working alongside. Can I think about it? Talk it over with my son? Of course, take your time. Catherine handed him her business card. Heavy cardstock embossed lettering, the physical manifestation of power and position. Call me Monday with your answer. No pressure either way. The offer stands as long as you need to decide. Wyatt appeared at his side, signing and speaking simultaneously, his face showing hope and excitement unburdened by adult cynicism. Dad, you should take it. That lady seems nice, and Nora needs people who understand her, plus we could actually save money for once instead of just paying bills. Nora herself was watching Garrett with those two wise eyes, her hands forming a single sign that carried universes of meaning. Please. The weight of expectation and possibility pressed down like atmosphere, making breathing difficult. Garrett had come tonight expecting to earn overtime pay and leave with a few $100 extra. Instead, he'd stopped a corporate coup, defended a child nobody else understood, been accused of theft and vindicated through evidence, and been offered a future he'd never imagined possible for someone like him. He looked at his son, at Nora, at Catherine, whose expression showed hope and vulnerability beneath the CEO mask. Looked at Monroe and the other investors who'd watched an electrician outmaneuver a conspiracy. Looked at his worn toolkit spread across the table, the tools of a trade he'd mastered through hard work rather than formal education. I'll call you Monday morning with my answer. It was Thursday night. That gave him 4 days to decide if he could survive in a world where his hands stayed clean and his work happened in offices instead of utility closets. 4 days to choose between comfortable inadequacy and terrifying possibility. 4 days to determine whether belonging was something he could claim or something that would always elude him regardless of salary or title. But as he gathered his toolkit and prepared to leave, Nora ran over and hugged him fiercely, her small arms wrapped tight around his waist, her hands signed against his chest where he could feel but not see them. Thank you for seeing me. Garrett signed back, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. Thank you for being brave enough to speak. Catherine watched this exchange without understanding the words. But the meaning was clear enough. Something had begun tonight that went beyond job offers and corporate deals. Some connection had formed between her daughter and this man who spoke her daughter's language, and Catherine's face showed that she knew she needed to learn that language herself if she wanted any hope of being included. The restaurant began emptying as midnight approached. Investors departed with renewed confidence in Catherine's leadership. Staff cleaned up the evening's chaos, their relief palpable that disaster had been averted. Brian thanked Garrett profusely for saving both the technical systems and possibly his job. George apologized for the search, explaining that procedures were procedures, but that he'd never really believed Garrett was guilty. Monroe paused on his way out, shaking Garrett's hand, with genuine respect rather than obligatory politeness. You did good work tonight, Mr. Brennan. Not just the electrical repairs, everything else too. Real skill always rises regardless of where it comes from. If you take Catherine's offer, you'll do well. You've got the kind of intelligence that can't be taught, only recognized. Outside, snow had begun falling again. large flakes drifting through the amber glow of streetlights settling on expensive cars and cracked sidewalks with equal indifference. Garrett walked Wyatt toward the subway, the boy chattering about everything he'd seen about Nora's bravery and the rich people's fancy clothes and how his dad had been like a detective solving mysteries. "Are you going to take the job, Dad?" "I don't know yet, buddy. It's a big change, different world from what I'm used to." "But you'd be good at it. You found the sabotage when nobody else did. You protected Nora, Ms. Ashford saw something in you that you won't see in yourself." They descended into the subway station, leaving the wealth of the Upper East Side for the working-class reality of Brooklyn. But Garrett carried Catherine's business card in his wallet, and Nora's gratitude in his memory, and the possibility of a future that didn't involve crawling through utility tunnels at 45. The question was whether possibility outweighed fear, whether he could trust that his skills mattered more than his pedigree, whether a world that had always judged him by his collar color might actually judge him by his competence instead. He wouldn't know until he tried, and that terrified him more than any electrical panel, any sabotage, any accusation ever had. Because trying meant risking failure in front of his son, meant proving his ex-wife right about his limitations, meant confronting every insecurity he'd carefully packaged and stored away. But as Wyatt had said, quoting words Garrett himself had spoken years ago, "We don't let fear choose for us. We feel the fear, then do the thing anyway. That's what courage means." Maybe it was time to practice what he preached. Maybe it was time to be as brave as an 8-year-old girl who'd defended him to a room full of powerful strangers. Maybe it was time to claim belonging instead of waiting for permission that would never come. Monday would tell. 4 days to decide. 4 days to choose between safety and possibility, between the known and the unknown, between the life he had and the life he might deserve. The subway rattled through darkness, carrying them home. But something had shifted tonight, some fundamental change in how Garrett saw himself and how others might see him. The world hadn't transformed, but maybe, just maybe, his place in it had. Christmas morning arrived, wrapped in silence and snow. Catherine stood at her penthouse window overlooking Central Park, watching early joggers leave tracks in fresh powder while the city still slept. Coffee cooled, forgotten, on the marble counter behind her. Her laptop displayed 7 open tabs on American Sign Language programs, each one promising competency in different time frames, each one. A reminder of 8 years of avoidance, disguised as busy schedules and competing priorities. The penthouse was silent except for the hum of heating and the distant sounds of the city waking below. Catherine had been awake since 4 a.m., unable to sleep after the evening's revelations. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nora's face. The joy when Garrett signed to her, the resignation when Catherine appeared the way her daughter had oriented herself toward a stranger rather than her own mother. Nora appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm. She stopped when she saw her mother actually awake before noon on a holiday. Something that hadn't happened since Nora could remember. Catherine turned, attempted a sign she'd found on YouTube at 3 in the morning during an insomnia-fueled research spiral, and completely butchered it. Nora giggled, the sound catching Catherine off guard with its unguarded joy. Her daughter crossed the room and gently corrected her mother's hand position, reshaping fingers into proper formation with the patience of someone who'd spent years teaching without recognition. They stood there for a moment, Nora's small hands guiding Catherine's larger ones through the mechanics of visual language, daughter teaching mother in a reversal that felt both natural and devastating. "Merry Christmas." Catherine spoke the words while signing them, hoping the combination conveyed what she felt, even if the execution remained clumsy and uncertain. Nora signed back, slowly exaggerating each movement for clarity. "Merry Christmas, Mom." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun sugar, precious as anything Catherine had ever negotiated or acquired. She wanted to pull her daughter close, to apologize for 8 years of choosing everything else first, to promise that things would change. But promises without action were just comfortable lies, and Nora deserved better than comfort. She deserved commitment backed by structure, by sacrifice, by the kind of prioritization Catherine had only ever given to tech finance. I enrolled in a program this morning, 4 classes per week, 6 months intensive, Brooklyn ASL School. Catherine pulled up the confirmation email on her laptop, showed Nora the schedule blocked in her calendar with the same priority level as board meetings. I start January 3rd. First class is at 6 p.m. I've already blocked every Wednesday and Friday evening for the entire 6 months. Nora's expression cycled through disbelief, hope, and protective skepticism, the face of someone who'd heard similar promises before and learned to guard against disappointment. Her hands moved carefully, testing the sincerity behind the words. You've said you'd learn before. 3 times you hired tutors, 3 times you canceled after 2 sessions. The accusation landed clean and deserved. Catherine had no defense beyond truth, no excuse that wouldn't sound hollow. I have, and I failed every time because I treated it like an optional skill instead of a necessity. I scheduled it around work instead of scheduling work around it. I was wrong. I'm going to fix that, but I know you have no reason to believe me based on past performance. So how do I know this time is different? Because I finally understand what I'm losing if I don't. Because last night I watched you defend someone with more courage than I've shown in years, and I couldn't understand a word you said. Because I'm tired of being a stranger to my own daughter. Because I realized I've spent 8 years trying to fix you when the only thing that needed fixing was me. Catherine's voice cracked slightly on the last words. She took a breath, steadied herself. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't struggle or get frustrated or make mistakes, but I can promise I'll show up. I can promise I'll try. And I can promise that this time you come first, not the company, not the deals, not the board, you. Nora studied her mother's face with that unnerving ability to read truth beneath performance, to see through artifice to actual intent. Whatever she saw must have satisfied some requirement, because she nodded slowly and signed something Catherine couldn't yet parse. The frustration of incomprehension burned fresh and immediate, a preview of months to come. I don't understand yet, but I will. I promise I will. The child's forgiveness came easier than Catherine deserved, wrapped in a hug that felt like absolution and renewed contract simultaneously. They spent Christmas morning attempting basic signs, Catherine's hands cramping after 20 minutes of unfamiliar movements, Nora patient in ways no 8-year-old should have to be. Each mistake Catherine made, Nora corrected with gentle precision. Each small success earned genuine praise that felt disproportionately meaningful, given the simplicity of the achievement, forming letters, correctly remembering basic vocabulary, maintaining proper hand shape, through full signs. Catherine's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from the Tech Finance Board. Questions about Donovan's removal requests for emergency meetings, demands for explanations of last night's chaos and what it meant for company stability and governance. She silenced each notification without reading, committed to this moment in ways she'd never managed before. Today belonged to Nora. The corporate fires could burn until tomorrow. The board could wait. For once in 8 years, work would come second. They practiced through lunch, Catherine's progress painfully slow but measurable. By afternoon, she could fingerspell the alphabet with only occasional errors and sign perhaps 20 basic words, family, food, feelings, simple verbs. It wasn't much. But it was more than she'd learned in the previous 8 years, combined more effort than she'd invested in her daughter's language than in mastering markets or negotiating acquisitions. Across Brooklyn, Garrett sat at his kitchen table with Wyatt, Catherine's business card positioned between them like a tarot reading awaiting interpretation. The number 95,000 felt abstract, too large to be real. The kind of figure that existed in other people's lives but never quite reached his own. You're going to take it, right? Wyatt signed and spoke, his face showing confusion that his father hadn't already accepted what seemed like obvious opportunity. It's way more money. We could actually save stuff instead of just paying bills forever. Money's not everything, bud, says the person who works overtime every week to pay my medical bills. The kid was too observant by half, too aware of sacrifices Garrett tried to hide. "Dad, I see the statements on the fridge. I know you take extra shifts. I know you skip lunches sometimes to save money. This job would fix all that." Garrett pulled the pile of statements from the refrigerator magnet, spread them across the table like evidence at Tro. 8,000 remaining after insurance payment plans stretching into next year, interest accumulating despite his best efforts at staying current. "With this salary, we'd pay these off in 6 months, have actual savings, maybe even take a vacation somewhere." Wyatt's eyes held dreams of normalcy that broke Garrett's heart. Simple things like family trips and financial security that other kids took for granted. You could work normal hours, be home for dinner, not spend every Christmas Eve fixing other people's problems while I'm at someone else's house. Corporate jobs aren't that simple. Different kind of overtime, different pressures, different ways of failing. But you'd be good at it. You found the sabotage when nobody else did. You protected Nora. You stood up to those rich people when they accused you. Ms. Ashford saw something in you that you won't see in yourself. Garrett met his son's eyes, hazel like his mother's, but carrying a wisdom Sarah had never possessed. 10 years old and already understanding things about his father that Garrett spent most days avoiding truths too uncomfortable to acknowledge directly. "I'm scared, Wyatt. These people have degrees from schools I couldn't afford to visit. They speak corporate language I don't know. They'll see right through me, see I'm just a mechanic pretending to be something I'm not. And when they do, when they realize they made a mistake hiring me, it'll be worse than if I'd never tried at all. You're not pretending. You are something. You just haven't let yourself believe it yet." The words hit harder than intended, settling into the spaces where doubt lived and festered. Garrett thought of his ex-wife's voice, her constant refrain that he lacked ambition, that he'd chosen comfort over growth, that maintaining electrical systems was a job rather than a career. He'd internalized that judgment, let it calcify into fact rather than recognizing it as her disappointment projected onto him. What if I fail? What if I take this job and prove everyone right whoever said I wasn't good enough? What if I embarrass you? What if you don't? Wyatt's hands shaped the question with perfect clarity, with the devastating simplicity of childhood logic untainted by adult cynicism. What if you're actually great at it? What if this is your chance to show people, show yourself what you're really worth? You taught me something after my accident. Remember when I was scared to go back to school, scared everyone would think I was dumb because I couldn't hear? Garrett remembered. 6 years old and terrified, convinced his temporary disability had become permanent identity, that the world would forever judge him by those months of sunts. "You said we don't let fear choose for us. We feel the fear, admit it's real, then do the thing anyway. That's what courage means. That's what separates people who change their lives from people who just wish they could." Wyatt's serious face broke into a grin that erased years from his expression. "So be courageous, Dad. Show me what courage looks like. Be the person you taught me to be." The challenge hung in the air between them. Garrett had spent 5 years teaching his son about bravery, about facing difficulty instead of avoiding it, about the importance of trying even when success wasn't guaranteed. Now his own lessons were being reflected back at him, and he couldn't hide behind excuses without proving himself a hypocrite. Monday morning, Garrett called Tech Finance and accepted the position. Catherine's relief was audible even through phone static, her professional composure cracking enough to reveal genuine emotion underneath. "You won't regret this. Report January 2nd. We'll get you set up with everything you need. Office, computer, phone, email, business cards, the works. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask. And Garrett, thank you for taking the chance. On yourself and on us." But Garrett knew corporate America asked for more than best efforts. It asked for fluency and unspoken rules, for comfort in offices where your tool belt marked you as outsider, for the ability to translate hard-won practical knowledge into PowerPoint presentations and strategic initiatives. He had 2 weeks to prepare for a world he'd spent 15 years avoiding, 2 weeks to transform himself from mechanic into director, from invisible to visible. January 3rd arrived cold and unforgiving. Catherine walked into Brooklyn ASL school feeling every inch the outsider, every bit the privileged interloper entering space where her wealth and position meant nothing. The community center basement smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. Nothing like the executive suites she inhabited daily. Folding chairs arranged in a circle looked less like educational infrastructure and more like support groups staging intimate and vulnerable in ways boardrooms never achieved. The other students ranged from teenagers to retirees, unified by their reasons for learning: grandchildren, friends, lovers, the human need to connect across difference. A grandfather learning for his 5-year-old grandson born deaf. A high school teacher with a new student who deserved full participation. A young couple, the boyfriend learning for his girlfriend with quiet dedication. A nurse wanting to serve deaf patients better. Each person carrying their own story of why silence mattered, why language beyond sound deserved effort. Rebecca Martinez, the instructor, commanded immediate respect, despite standing barely 5 feet tall. Deaf since birth, 60 years of navigating a hearing world had carved wisdom into her face and steel into her presence. She assessed Catherine with eyes that missed nothing, that saw through designer clothes to the person underneath. "Welcome. I'm Rebecca. I'll be your instructor." Her hands moved while an interpreter voiced her words for the hearing students still learning to read signs. "Let me be clear from the start. Power and money don't matter in this room. Titles don't matter. What you do for a living doesn't matter. Only commitment matters. Can you commit, or are you just visiting? Because if you're visiting, don't waste my time or theirs." Catherine felt 17 years of professional armor dissolve under that gaze, all her competence rendered meaningless by ignorance she could no longer hide. "I'm here to learn. Whatever it takes. My daughter deserves a mother who can speak her language." "Good answer. But talk is cheap. We'll see if your actions match your words. Everyone says they're committed. Few people are willing to do the work when it gets hard, and it will get hard. Learning a new language as an adult is one of the most difficult things you'll ever do. Your brain doesn't want to do it. Your ego will fight you every step. You'll feel stupid and frustrated and tempted to quit. The question is whether you'll push through that or give up when things get uncomfortable." The first class destroyed any illusions Catherine harbored about quick mastery. The manual alphabet alone consumed 45 minutes. Her fingers refused to form proper shapes, cramping into awkward positions that resembled ASL the way crayon drawings resembled Rembrandt. She confused B with HM with N, mixed up letters that looked similar. Forgot sequences she'd just learned. Around her, other students progressed with varying competence, but none seemed quite as helpless as a CEO accustomed to competence in every domain suddenly confronted with fundamental inadequacy. Rebecca stopped Catherine 15 minutes in. Corrected her hand position for the 3rd time with patience wearing thin. "You're trying to control the language. Stop it. Let it flow through you instead." "I don't understand the difference." "That's because you're still trying to control understanding." Rebecca's hands moved with fluid grace, each sign a song work of art. "Language isn't about control. It's about surrender. You can't manage communication the way you manage a business. You have to stop performing and start experiencing. Feel the language instead of thinking about it." The concept ran counter to every instinct Catherine had honed across 15 years of executive leadership. Control was survival. Surrender was death. But here in this basement with industrial lighting and cheap coffee, her usual tools were useless. She was just another beginner, just another person struggling to connect across difference. Homework arrived like a sentence practice, 30 minutes daily. Without exception, learn 20 basic signs by next class, attend a deaf community coffee hour Friday evening, have a 5-minute conversation with a deaf person using only signs. Catherine stared at the assignment sheet with rising panic. Where did one find deaf community events? How did one approach strangers and request conversation practice? The logistics of humility were harder than expected for someone accustomed to having answers rather than asking questions. That evening, she attempted practice with Nora. Her daughter sat across the dinner table with patient resignation, correcting Catherine's mistakes while completing math homework, a multitasking that made Catherine's failures more apparent. 20 minutes and Catherine's hands ached, her brain felt overloaded, and frustration boiled beneath her careful composure. "This is harder than running a company." Nora's response carried gentle truth, the wisdom of someone who'd navigated this difficulty her entire life. "Running company has rules you understand. You know how business works. But language has feeling you have to learn. Different kind of hard. Can't think your way through it. Have to feel your way." The distinction struck Catherine as profound. She'd spent her adult life mastering systems, corporate hierarchies, market dynamics, board politics. All of it governed by rules that could be learned and leveraged. But language, real language that connected rather than commanded, required something she'd never cultivated. Vulnerability, patience, the willingness to be incompetent in service of eventual competence. They worked until Nora's bedtime, Catherine improving marginally but measurably, each small victory feeling disproportionately significant. When she tucked her daughter in a ritual she'd often delegated to nannies over the years, Nora signed something Catherine almost understood, but not quite the frustration of near comprehension, worse than complete ignorance. "Could you repeat that slower, please?" Nora's hands moved with exaggerated care, breaking the sentence into digestible pieces. "Thank you for trying, for being here." Catherine felt tears threaten for the first time since the divorce, since the deafness diagnosis, since the last time she'd allowed herself to feel rather than manage. "Thank you for teaching me, for being patient with me when I don't deserve it." Across town, Garrett was experiencing his own crisis of competence. January 2nd at Tech Finance began with orientation paperwork and the slow realization that he'd entered foreign territory where natives spoke languages he didn't know. The office occupied floors 38 through 45 of a midtown tower where the elevator alone was nicer than his apartment. Everyone wore business casual with unconscious ease, carried laptops worth more than his entire toolkit, spoke in acronyms and corporate buzzwords that might as well have been ancient Greek. His office overlooked Manhattan with views that probably cost more in rent than he earned monthly at Heritage. Desk ergonomic chair, dual monitors, phone system with more buttons than seemed necessary. A nameplate reading Garrett Brennan, Director of Facilities and Accessibility, sat beside his keyboard. The physical manifestation of imposter syndrome made tangible. Catherine materialized in his doorway at 9:15, perfectly composed in tailored suit and heels that clicked authority against polished floors. "Welcome. Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," which probably isn't very ready at all. "Good. People who think they're completely ready usually aren't. Self-awareness is valuable." She handed him a folder. "I want you to conduct a comprehensive accessibility audit of the entire company. Find every barrier for disabled employees or customers, every single one. Budget is whatever you need within reason. Timeline is 60 days. Questions?" Garrett nodded, grateful for concrete assignment rather than abstract strategy. "Can I bring my son after school? Kids notice things adults miss. Different perspective might be valuable." "Absolutely. Wyatt's insights could be crucial. Fresh eyes see what familiar ones overlook. Plus it'll give you time with him instead of working late every night." The audit consumed 2 weeks. Garrett and Wyatt examined every floor, every office, every bathroom and conference room and emergency exit. They documented, photographed, tested, questioned. The findings were damning. No visual fire alarms for deaf employees. No ASL interpretation for company meetings. No captions on training videos. Doorways too narrow for wheelchairs in 3 buildings. Bathrooms lacking proper grab bars and accessible stalls. Elevators missing braille buttons. Websites incompatible with screen readers. Tech Finance talked progressive values while maintaining infrastructure that excluded millions. Garrett's presentation to the leadership team represented his first real test. He'd spent 3 days with Wyatt building a PowerPoint, learning the software through YouTube tutorials and trial and error, the process humbling but ultimately successful. The result was basic but clear photos of each problem, proposed solutions, cost estimates, return on investment calculations that justified expense through both moral and financial arguments. Kenneth Vance, the CFO, challenged him immediately, his skepticism barely disguised. $280,000 is substantial expenditure. What's the concrete ROI? How do we justify this to shareholders who care about profits, not feel-good initiatives? Garrett had anticipated this question. Catherine had warned him that Kenneth viewed everything through financial lens, that moral arguments alone wouldn't suffice. 23% of Americans live with disabilities. That's 76 million potential customers you're currently excluding through inaccessible infrastructure. The disability market represents $490 billion in disposable income annually. If we capture even 2% of that market segment, ROI exceeds 300% within 18 months. We're not spending money on accessibility, we're investing in market expansion with better returns than most acquisitions. That assumes they choose us over accessible competitors. There aren't many accessible competitors in our sector. We'd have first-mover advantage in an underserved market segment with enormous purchasing power and intense brand loyalty. Disabled consumers and their families remember companies that include them, and they remember companies that don't. Garrett pulled up slide 7, the one Wyatt had helped design. Plus the moral case. Accessibility shouldn't require business justification, but if you need one, here it is. We do what's right and profit from doing it, best of both worlds. Belonging isn't given, it's claimed. You belong anywhere you decide to belong. Garrett was learning to claim his space in rooms that once intimidated him, learning that his knowledge had value even when it came from experience rather than classrooms. Catherine's approval was subtle but unmistakable. Approved. Start implementation immediately. Garrett, excellent work. This is exactly the kind of analysis I needed. Welcome to leadership. Kenneth's skepticism remained visible, but he nodded reluctantly. Garrett had survived his first corporate gauntlet through preparation, and the recognition that his practical knowledge had value even in rooms full of MBAs. Still, leaving the conference room felt like escaping examination, his shirt damp with nervous sweat that executive air conditioning couldn't quite cool. February brought parallel struggles that occasionally intersected. Catherine maintained her ASL commitment despite constant pressure to prioritize work emergencies over language classes. 3 times she almost missed class, 3 times she delegated instead of canceling learning. Slowly, that structure enabled dedication rather than restricting it. Her signing improved from terrible to merely bad, her comprehension from non-existent to fragmentary. Conversations with Nora became less frustrating as Catherine's vocabulary expanded from 20 words to 50 to eventually over 100, though complex discussions still required painful patience on both sides. Then the crisis hit. The crisis. Green Tech Systems, Tech Finance's largest client, worth $12 million annually, threatened to leave over service concerns that had been building for months. The situation demanded 72 consecutive hours of Catherine's attention: renegotiations, damage control, technical solutions to systemic problems. She missed Wednesday and Friday ASL classes, missed Nora's school presentation Thursday afternoon, where her daughter performed an ASL poem she'd written herself about what it felt like to be heard for the first time. Saturday morning, Catherine tried to practice with Nora. The girl sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, face closed off in ways that made her seem far older than 9. Catherine pulled out flashcards, attempted a cheerful tone that rang hollow even to her own ears. Want to practice our signs? Nora's hands moved fast and angry, her frustration finding voice in sharp gestures that cut like knives. You always say sorry, but nothing changes. You promised learning was priority. You promised 3 strikes rule. This is strike 2 this week. Next week you'll have excuse again. Catherine caught maybe half the signs, enough to understand the accusation's core but not its full weight. I had a client crisis. The company could have lost $12 million. I don't care about the company. Nora's signs sliced through air with violent precision, with years of accumulated disappointment erupting all at once. I don't care about $12 million you promised to learn my language, but you still make me live in yours, still make everything about what you need instead of what I need. When do I matter more than money? The girl grabbed Mr. Buttons, hurled him across the kitchen with surprising force for someone so small, then ran to her bedroom. The door slam reverberated through the penthouse like a verdict, like the sound of something precious breaking beyond repair. Catherine stood, frozen flashcards in hand, confronting the ruins of her latest failure. Maybe Donovan had been right. Maybe she couldn't be CEO and adequate mother simultaneously. Maybe the choice he'd forced was real rather than false, and she'd been deluding herself, thinking she could restructure her way out of fundamental incompatibility between competing demands. Her phone rang. Rebecca's number. Catherine almost didn't answer, but guilt made her swipe green. You missed 3 classes this week. Rebecca's voice carried no judgment, just statement of fact that felt worse than condemnation. That's strike 3 under your program rules. 1 more miss for non-emergency reasons and you're removed from the program permanently. I had a work emergency that required my immediate attention. Everyone has emergencies. The question isn't what emergencies arise. It's which ones you choose to prioritize when they conflict with prior commitments. Rebecca paused, letting the words settle like sediment. Learning ASL isn't a hobby you pick up when convenient. It's a commitment to a person who needs you to speak her language. If you're waiting to finish learning before prioritizing your daughter, you'll wait forever. Learning never finishes. It's ongoing daily forever. The question is whether you're committed to the process or just the outcome. The truth landed like a physical blow, forcing air from Catherine's lungs. She'd been treating ASL like a project with a completion date, a box to check before returning to normal operations. But language didn't work that way. Nora didn't work that way. Connection required continuous effort, not one-time achievement. What do I do? Decide if this is commitment or hobby. Then live that decision consistently instead of episodically. Stop telling your daughter she matters and start showing her through choices that cost you something. Catherine ended the call. Stood in her immaculate kitchen with its marble counters and designer appliances and made a choice that would cost her. Called her assistant William and instructed him to block every Wednesday and Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. as completely untouchable, non-negotiable. Treat like she's in surgery or dead. Find alternative solutions for any conflicts without exception. Then called the board and told them she was hiring a deputy CEO to handle operational decisions, freeing herself for strategic focus and personal commitments that she would no longer sacrifice. The moves cost her politically. Board members questioned her judgment. Kenneth Vance accused her of weakness disguised as delegation. Competitors sensed vulnerability they might exploit. But Catherine had learned something at that Christmas dinner. Some costs were worth paying. Some choices mattered more than market share or quarterly earnings or the opinion of people who measured worth exclusively in dollars. She knocked on Nora's door, received no response, knocked again. Eventually the door opened. Nora's face was tear-stained and defiant, expecting another excuse, another apology without action, another promise destined for breaking. Catherine handed her daughter a printed calendar. Every Wednesday and Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. was blocked in red, labeled Untouchable ASL with Nora. Below that, a contract Catherine had written and signed in actual ink. I, Catherine Ashford, commit to learning ASL. If I miss 3 classes for any non-emergency reason, Nora gets to choose consequences, including but not limited to taking away my phone for a week, making me donate $1,000 to deaf community organizations per miss, or requiring me to attend double classes to make up. Nora is the sole judge of what constitutes an emergency. Nora studied the document with lawyers' scrutiny, looking for loopholes or escape clauses. What counts as emergency? Hospital, death, natural disaster, nothing work-related counts. You're the judge of what qualifies. You have veto power. Catherine's voice was steady, This is me putting you in control of accountability. You enforce the rules, I follow them. If I break them, you choose the penalty. They shook hands solemnly, sealing a contract more binding than any she'd signed in corporate life. Catherine didn't know if she could maintain this commitment, didn't know if restructuring would work or if she was simply delaying inevitable failure. But she knew that trying and failing was better than not trying at all, that showing Nora she mattered enough to keep promises was more important than maintaining perfect success rates. Through February and into March, Catherine kept her word with religious devotion. She delegated ruthlessly, restructured her calendar around non-negotiable blocks, learned to trust her executive team with decisions she'd previously micromanaged. The company didn't collapse, in fact, freed from operational details. Catherine focused on strategic initiatives that grew revenue rather than merely maintaining it. Her ASL improved from painful to functional, from fragmentary to conversational. She'd never be fluent, Rebecca warned, not starting this late with adult brain plasticity working against her. But functional was enough for daily life, enough for genuine communication, enough to bridge the distance that had separated her from Nora for 9 years. Meanwhile, Garrett navigated corporate culture with assistance from an unexpected source. Catherine had started meeting with him weekly, ostensibly to review accessibility progress. But their conversations increasingly drifted personal. She asked about his parenting strategies, about balancing Wyatt's needs with work, demands about how he'd learned to integrate rather than separate the parts of his life. Garrett asked about her ASL journey, about the mechanics of learning language as an adult, about strategies for managing frustration when progress came slower than desired. Their mutual seeking created alliance, then friendship, then something neither acknowledged. But both felt a warmth that went beyond professional respect, an awareness that made ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. Late February coffee breaks became March lunch meetings. Professional boundaries stayed intact but grew porous, the lines blurring in ways both noticed but neither named. Garrett learned that Catherine's CEO armor protected vulnerability rather than replacing it. That beneath the competence lived someone who questioned herself as relentlessly as he questioned himself. Catherine discovered that Garrett's blue-collar background disguised sophisticated intelligence, that formal education had never captured, that his lack of credentials masked wisdom earned through experience rather than classrooms. One afternoon in early March, reviewing accessibility budgets in Catherine's office, Garrett's hand brushed Catherine's, reaching for the same document. The contact lasted half a second, purely accidental, but awareness jolted through the brief touch like current through copper wire. Both froze. Eye contact held 2 seconds too long, long enough for possibility to crystallize into recognition. "Sorry," Garrett pulled back, face coloring. "Don't be." Catherine's voice came quieter than her usual executive authority. Neither mentioned it, neither needed to. Something had shifted from professional to personal, from respect to attraction, from working relationship to the possibility of something unnamed. March 20th brought Nora's spring concert. Catherine had blocked the entire evening weeks in advance. Arrived early, had spent the previous night learning the ASL version of What a Wonderful World that Nora's class was performing. The performance was beautiful. Nora stepped forward for her solo. Her small hands shaped each word with precision and emotion. Catherine stood in the audience and signed along, her movements imperfect but earnest. Other parents noticed. Nora saw her mother signing and her face transformed. The smile that erupted was pure joy, the kind Catherine hadn't seen in years. After the concert, Nora ran to Catherine and hugged tight. "You learned the song, you practiced, you were there, you saw me. You were amazing. I was just trying to keep up." For the first time in memory, they had a full conversation without frustration. Catherine's signing remained imperfect but good enough. Real connection. The goal she'd chased for 9 years had always been simpler than she'd believed, not fixing her daughter but learning her daughter's language. Driving home, Nora signed a question Catherine almost missed in the rearview mirror. "Do you like Garrett?" Catherine's hand stayed on the wheel. He's a colleague and friend. No. Do you like him? Why do you ask? Because you smile differently when you talk about him, and you get quiet when he's around like you're happy and scared at the same time. Kids noticed everything. Garrett is special. He understands things most people don't. Do you want him to be more than a friend? The question hung in the car's interior. Catherine considered lying, but she'd promised honesty. Maybe. I don't know yet. Relationships are complicated. Nora's response came with devastating simplicity. Not really. Do you like him? Does he like you? Then try. The opportunity came a week later. Catherine and Garrett had a working dinner scheduled. Catherine chose a small restaurant in the West Village, intimate but not obviously romantic. They started with work, but 40 minutes in the conversation shifted. Garrett mentioned his ex-wife, how she'd viewed his trade work as lack of ambition. She saw a maintenance worker. I saw a skilled tradesman. That gap killed the marriage. Catherine recognized the pain. Her loss was monumental. Was it though? Maybe she was right? You learned an entire language to communicate with your son. You solved corporate sabotage. You saw value in me when I couldn't see it myself. Catherine held his gaze. Ambition isn't about climbing ladders, it's about committing to what matters. Garrett's expression shifted. I feel like a fraud every day. Like everyone sees I'm just an electrician playing dress-up. Catherine heard echoes of her own imposter syndrome. I've been CEO 12 years. I still feel like an imposter some days, especially as a mother. The check arrived. Both reached for it. Their hands collided. This time neither pulled away immediately. This isn't a business dinner anymore, is it? Is that okay? Yeah, it's more than okay. They walked through the West Village afterward. Garrett stopped near Washington Square Park. I'm scared of this. Of us. Why? Because you're brilliant, accomplished CEO, and I'm just a guy who fixes things. Catherine stepped closer. Garrett, you solved a conspiracy while protecting my daughter. You learned a language because love demanded it. You saw value in me when I'd lost sight of it. Her voice dropped. You're not just anything. You're the most extraordinary, ordinary man I've ever met. The kiss happened slowly, tentative at first, then deeper, more certain. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Wow. Yeah, wow. April 5th, they gathered both children. Catherine cooked. Wyatt and Nora were already comfortable together. Kids, we want to talk about something. Nora's hands flew. You're dating. We know. Wyatt grinned. You're not subtle. Dad's been whistling. Both adults laughed. Garrett recovered first. How long have you known? 3 weeks. You get weird around each other. Catherine found herself laughing. We wanted to make sure you're both okay with this. The kids exchanged a look. Wyatt fixed Catherine with serious attention. Are you going to be nice to my dad? I promise. Nora signed to Garrett. Are you going to make sure Mom keeps learning signs? Every day, no excuses. The children deliberated, finally nodding. Okay, we approve, but we have rules. The rules: weekly family dinners, no excessive PDA, honest apologies when fights happened. That evening became their first official gathering. Cooking together, kids setting the table, comfortable chaos. It felt natural. Spring progressed into summer. Catherine maintained her commitment. Tech Finance's accessibility initiatives generated positive press. The board's doubt transformed into approval. June 24th marked 6 months since Christmas. Tech Finance hosted an accessibility conference. Catherine delivered the keynote. Garrett and Nora co-presented. Catherine stood at the podium. 6 months ago, I almost lost everything. I had success by every metric except the one that mattered: communicating with my daughter. She showed the video from Christmas. That's the moment I realized I'd been solving the wrong problems. Garrett and Nora demonstrated implementations. Results: 7 deaf employees hired, 55% customer increase, $4 million in revenue. Standing ovation. After the conference, 4 people gathered on the rooftop. Garrett pulled Catherine aside. 6 months ago, I was just trying to finish my shift. 6 months ago, I couldn't talk to my daughter. Garrett reached into his pocket, pulled out a box, and dropped to one knee. He signed first, "Will you marry me?" Then in English, "I know it's fast, but I love you. I love Nora. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple platinum band, single diamond. Catherine's eyes filled. "Yes, absolutely yes." Behind them, kids cheering erupted. "I helped pick the ring. I taught Dad the signs." December 24th came around again. Heritage Restaurant hosted their wedding, 40 guests. Rabbi Sarah Klein conducted the ceremony bilingually. Wyatt stood as best man 11 now. Nora served as maid of honor 9 and confident. Garrett signed and spoke. "Catherine, you taught me that love isn't about the easy path. I promise to honor your work, your struggles, your victories." Catherine's voice remained steady. "Garrett, you saw me when I was invisible. I promise to value your wisdom, respect your skills, celebrate your extraordinariness." They kissed as married people while their children cheered. Monroe approached Garrett. "Year ago you saved Catherine's deal. Best investment I made." 3 years later, Garrett's consulting firm operated from Brooklyn with Wyatt now 14 working summers. Nora at 12 middle school ASL club president with 60 members. She'd launched Hear Every Voice that spread to 40 schools. Catherine remained CEO. 20% of workforce had disabilities. Revenue up 60%. The board unanimously supported her. Weekly dinners remained tradition. Some families are born, others are built. A photograph on Garrett's desk, 4 people signing family. Below it, belonging isn't given, it's claimed. Because sometimes the best things come from broken systems and brave choices. Sometimes extraordinary hides inside ordinary. Sometimes the maintenance worker knows more than the MBA. Sometimes the CEO needs surrender to find connection. Sometimes a 12-year-old girl teaches everyone how to listen. They learned each other's languages. Garrett learned to claim space. Catherine learned presence mattered more than perfection. Wyatt learned his father's worth. Nora learned her difference was strength. And on Christmas Eves they returned to Heritage, remembering the night a frightened girl and kind man spoke in slents and changed lives. The snow still fell. The city still moved. But 4 strangers had become family through choice and effort and daily commitment. That was worth more than any empire. That was everything.